Believe it or not, it's been 10 years since we got the first teaser for what we now know as Sonic Forces. Man, do you remember watching that 25th anniversary live stream, getting that epic looking teaser of Sonic running through a city being ravaged by Eggman robots and classic Sonic being there too? Remember waiting months for them to show even more? Because I don't. I've expressed this before, but it wasn't until 2018, roughly a year after Forces was released, that I started getting into the Sonic series, and it wasn't even because of any then recently released game. And it wasn't until the beginning of 2020 that I played Forces. With that in mind, I can only imagine that I'd be in a position to be more lenient to the game compared to Sonic fans who had stuck with the series for much longer. A big reason that they were so vitriolic is because of how much was riding on the game at the time. By then, the last high-profile Sonic game that was well liked was Generations, and the years following it were pretty rough. Some might even say rocky. Forces seemed like it was going to return to the same style of game as Generations, complete with a more serious looking story and tone. So to wait all that time only to be met with a game that was as underwhelming as it was, and additionally wasted a really cool premise, could definitely do a lot to break one's spirit. However, I wasn't waiting years for Forces to come out, and all I had ever heard about it was that it was not very good, which meant it would be hard to set me up for disappointment. Plus, there were other Sonic games that I wasn't as strongly negative towards as other people were, and conversely, there have been Sonic games that I don't enjoy very much, but I'm hesitant to call bad. They're just not for me, I suppose. Sure, playing so many other Sonic games might make Forces look inferior, but again, it's not like I was expecting Forces to live up to them. So, open to the possibility that the game would be fine enough on its own merits, I played it in 2020, I gave it another shot in 2022, and I tried again in 2024. Each time I tried harder to see the appeal of it, and each time I came to the same conclusion. Sonic Forces is actually pretty bad. I don't say that lightly either. I notice that when most people talk about the overall reception of Sonic Forces, it kind of depends on how they themselves perceive the game. If they really hate it, they'll act like the consensus is that Forces is just a mediocre disappointment, but if they themselves just think the game is mediocre, they'll say, the Sonic fanbase acts like Forces killed their grandma, or something. I, however, don't want to come across as if I'm exaggerating. Normally, I'd be willing to admit that the game isn't really badly made, and people just construe the game being kind of vapid or boring as worse than being bad. In this case though, no, I mean it. I firmly consider Sonic Forces to be a bad game, and I'm here to talk about the reason why. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into most of Sonic Forces' issues. There are plenty of reviews out there that have already taken it apart, and this isn't meant to be one of them. To summarize though, this game feels undercooked in pretty much every way. The story premise should by all means make this a landmark entry in the series, but it ends up having basically no sense of presentation, with awkwardly toned dialogue, half the cutscenes taking place in static text boxes with the same backdrop every time, and the levels themselves having subpar environmental storytelling. Said levels are also incredibly short and barren of a lot of the mechanics that made past and future Boost style Sonic games so engaging. Additionally, classic Sonic just kind of wanders on set and his gameplay feels wonky, especially compared to the then recently released Sonic Mania. Even the music and visuals, while fine, don't feel like they were made with the same production quality you'd expect from a Sonic game, especially considering this was kinda Sonic's big debut on new consoles. Personally, besides maybe the classic Sonic thing, I pin these issues on the game's limited team size, which I suspect the failure of Sonic Boom had something to do with, but I've already talked about that in the past, over 6 years ago in fact. The thing is, if those issues were all that was wrong with Sonic Forces, then I would be willing to side with the crowd that believes this game to just be mediocre and underwhelming. What I've talked about so far is largely in comparison to previous Sonic games and not super offensive in its own right. Really, I don't think I'd still be talking about it at all. Maybe I'd even have some fun coming back to it every once in a while. However, this game also has a proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. A problem with the controls that goes beyond a simple lack of development and is an outright contradiction of, at least what I would consider a sensible game design. Something that nobody else seems to have ever acknowledged, and the reason I made this video. Yeah, finally getting to that. It's not even the wonky acceleration, which people have pointed out before, it's the jump. They messed up the jump, and they did so in a way that nearly no other platformer I've played comes close to. To illustrate what I mean, we need to get a bit old school. One way in which I've heard people say that Super Mario Bros. Revolutionized the platforming genre was in its jumping controls, namely that it lets you control Mario's jump arc in midair. How does that work though? Well, let's say you're getting a running start moving right and decide to jump. If you were to keep holding right, then Mario's speed would continue to increase, unless you're already at top speed, in which case he keeps going forward with that. If you let go of the direction, Mario will continue forward at a set speed. If you press the opposite direction, in this case left, then Mario will slow down and start going the other direction. Simple, right? Pressing right skews you right, pressing left skews you left. Now, of course, not every game has to work like Mario. I mean, this is a Sonic video, that speaks for itself. Take Mega Man, for example. We're going all over the place here. His controls are much tighter and don't have the same variable speed. If you get a running start and hold forward, Mega Man keeps moving forward at a set speed. If you let go of the direction in midair, Mega Man will halt his forward movement instantly. If you press the opposite direction in midair, Mega Man will start moving in the other direction in a snap. It's much tighter than Mario, but on its own merits it works consistently. On the other hand, something like Castlevania came out after Super Mario Bros. And still has a fixed jump arc, where whatever direction you're pressing in midair doesn't affect Simon's jump at all. That might sound like a bad thing, but really, it just makes it so the challenge comes from jumping and whipping with proper timing, rather than maneuvering properly. These games' jumping controls all work differently, but they at least have one thing in common with each other, and with the majority of platformers in general, including most previous Sonic games. To illustrate what that something is, let's loop back around and see how the jump controls work in Sonic Forces, shall we? I should preface this by saying that I'm specifically talking about modern Sonic and the Avatar here. Classic Sonic has its own set of rules that aren't applicable. Anyways, if you get a running start and jump in this game, what happens? Well, if you're holding forward, you keep moving forward at the same speed. Your speed doesn't increase all that much, but I guess I can live with that. If you let go of the direction, Sonic or the Avatar will stop almost on a dime, losing all their horizontal speed instantly. Again, nothing wrong with that in itself, it's kinda like Mega Man. Now here comes the fun part. If you try to press the opposite direction in midair, Sonic will slow down, but he will not come to a stop nearly as quickly as he would if you were to let go of the direction. Depending on how quickly you're moving when you jump, you can't even get him to turn around at all. Yes, you heard that right. Pressing backwards actually makes you go backwards less than if you were to let go of the direction entirely. That's one of the most, well, backwards control issues I've ever witnessed in a platformer. In all of the other examples that I've listed, pressing backwards during a jump doesn't make you go forward any more than just letting go of the direction does. That's what they all have in common, and yet Forces defies that for no real reason. This is a problem that I haven't seen anyone bring up specifically, but plenty of reviews of Sonic Forces point out how the 2D platforming controls simply don't feel right and lack the precision of previous games, and I believe this control issue to be the reason why. As some might say, you might not have noticed it, but your brain did. You might be thinking, what do the platforming controls matter when all you do in the game is mindlessly boost through stages? Well, looking at the game's stage roster, I actually think that's a little reductive, since they do get reasonably more complex as the game goes along. Sure, the 3D sections don't ever reach the level of past boost games, and quite frankly, even with experience and looking up speedrun guides, I haven't found a single satisfying way to improve clear times in these, save for the drill wisp on. The 2D sections, meanwhile, these, ironically enough, actually have a bit more depth to them in the back half of the game, introducing some interesting stage mechanics and making the player more involved. Metropolitan Highway has these platforms that quickly move once you step on them, and sometimes you'll have to quickly jump off at the right time in order to not get sent into danger. It actually requires you to play with precision, and you can even do a couple small skips if you have prior knowledge. Even better is the surprisingly intricate indoor portion of Network Terminal, which has a bunch of different pathways you can take that aren't immediately obvious, some of which have you use the slide, which otherwise goes underutilized, and a pretty neat central gimmick where spillages of purple water cause carousel platforms to spin. The last couple Avatar-focused stages are both mostly 2D and have some pretty decent platforming elements like giant crushing crab legs, purple electricity that crawls along the walls and floor, and wall jumping quickly enough to avoid getting destroyed by a giant blue laser. Unlike some of, say, Sonic Colors' 2D gimmicks, these don't forcibly slow down the gameplay and tie in surprisingly well with the theme of each stage. All this praise should make it sound like the game actually becomes pretty fun in its later stages, and yet these sections actively make the game worse because the basic act of positioning yourself onto platforms is uncomfortable. Think you overshot a platform and want to go back? Whoops, you're actually still coasting forward because you're doing the logical thing and trying to go backwards. Think your forward momentum is gonna carry you to the next platform? Sorry, but now you have no forward momentum specifically because you let go of the direction and now you can't get it back. Enjoy the abyss. It's just obnoxious to deal with, and it has not gotten better with time and practice. Oh, come come on, you're just exaggerating. Every 3D Sonic game has control issues. It can't be worse than insert Sonic game you don't like, right? This should be something you can get used to, right? Well, no, this isn't a just get used to it thing. For one, this seems to be an oversight and not a deliberate choice on the developer's part, and I can't think of another Sonic game where the controls feel bugs like this. Say what you will about the charge jump and auto running of secret rings, but those were at least done intentionally and aren't even completely taboo concepts in and of themselves. By contrast, there is nothing in Forces that suggests to you, hey, don't actually press backwards if you want to go backwards in midair, idiot. And that advice is not self-explanatory either. And yes, I know I'm insinuating that I think Secret Rings controls better than Forces. I'm going for the throat here. That leads to my other point. The handling issues in previous Sonic games were always a matter of the numbers being off and not a logical contradiction. Sometimes Sonic's speed is too slow, or maybe his acceleration is too high making him feel slippery, or maybe the turning feels too stiff, or either his airspeed or air direction are too hard to adjust, etc, etc. While I can understand if people find these quirks uncomfortable and annoying to deal with, I could actually adjust to them in a way I can't with Force's air controls, and that's because when you boil them down, most of the problems aren't that outlandish in and of themselves. Sure, maybe Sonic in 06 or Lost World may be too slow, but have you ever heard of a little series called Klonoa? In those games you move even slower than you do in Sonic 06, but they're still very well liked by the people who play them, so clearly that's not inherently a bad thing. You could argue that Klonoa is better designed around its slow speed, and it is, but that implies that there is a way to design around slow speed, which implies that the speed of 06 or Lost World could theoretically have worked out with better stage design. Similar things apply to the other control issues of previous Sonic games. Sure, you could say Shadow the Hedgehog has ice physics, but by that same token, ice physics are an actual thing in other games. Yeah, it's bizarre how Sonic 06's air controls let you change direction instantly but don't let you slow down, but the 2D Metroid games follow those same rules when you're somersaulting and people don't seem to have an issue with that. Maybe Unleashed's drift is too wide, but one of the main defenses I hear for that is that it works like it does in any other racing game, where letting go of the gas helps you make tight turns easier or whatnot. You could keep listing off examples of commonly cited control issues in the Sonic series, and I still wouldn't find them as offensive as Sonic Force's platforming controls. I can't stress this enough, the problem with them isn't that they have too much or not enough of something, it's that they're backwards. They actively work counter to what other games, both in and out of the Sonic series, would have you expect. Even on the off chance that I could get used to this control issue, that doesn't make it good on any level. Again, you'd be tempted to say the same about the control oddities in other Sonic games, but there's an argument to be made that some of them serve some sort of purpose or benefit the gameplay in some way. In Lost World, Sonic slows down a lot when turning in 3D, but to some degree this was also true in the adventure games. That's because the alternative, where Sonic doesn't slow down when turning, can risk feeling really skittish and out of control. On the other hand, people will understandably rag on Sonic Heroes for how slippery the speed characters are, but honestly, now that I've gotten used to it, I often find myself defaulting to the speed characters over flight and power because their excessive speed and acceleration makes a lot of sections quicker. The way the air controls work in Sonic Forces does not have any advantage at all. I really don't see any reason they couldn't have either made Sonic carry some forward momentum when you let go of the stick, or change directions more quickly when you press the opposite direction. I also don't see any way in which they could have designed stages to accommodate this control quirk. No matter how you arrange the platforms in height or distance or whatever, the controls would still throw you off guard, and fixing the controls in one of the aforementioned ways, I can only imagine, would have been strictly easier to build stages around. Now, in all fairness, for as much as I act like this control behavior is unprecedented, Sonic Forces isn't quite the only game I've played to have it. I actually noticed it in a couple of games I played at last year's Sonic Amateur Games Expo, in fact, and the issue seems to be with the normal acceleration value overriding the deceleration value. Now, being a fan game dev myself, I get the struggle with getting every detail right, and I feel like I shouldn't tell others how to make their game, but if I could make a request, don't do this, please. Like, this control quirk still seems like an oversight that makes platforming uncomfortable, one that can be fixed by the game checking if you're pressing the opposite direction that you're moving in. Even without factoring in amateur games, this control quirk can actually be traced back to Sonic Lost World, the game that Forces code was supposedly built off of. That explains a lot about the game when you think about it. Moreover, I've also noticed this quirk showing up in Crash Bandicoot 2, Cortex Strikes Back for the PlayStation, particularly on the occasion it goes into 2D. The difference is that in these games, the player is slow enough that they can still reasonably turn around in midair, and in the case of Crash 2, they actually fixed the problem in the following game instead of making it even worse. Speaking of which, some of you might be thinking, what about these two games? These are technically built off of Forces too, so do these have the same control issue? Not quite, actually. Both of these games fix it, but in opposite ways. How strange. If you let go of the control stick in midair in Frontiers, Sonic no longer stops on a dime and will carry some forward momentum, similar to how he does when you press the other direction. It's a little hard to turn around without the air boost, but at least platforming feels consistent and predictable. Shadow Generations, meanwhile, if you let go of the direction in midair, Shadow will stop on a dime, but he also instantly snaps to the opposite direction if you decide to press it. While I wouldn't call either of these solutions ideal, they both demonstrate to me a nuanced understanding of what Sonic Forces did wrong and a legitimate attempt to remedy it. Really, I see that all over these games, and that's a part of why I wish I liked Sonic Forces more than I did. At the time, it seemed to demonstrate that the people making Sonic products just didn't care anymore, that they were utterly complacent and didn't care about quality games or taking risks or anything because they didn't need to. In recent years, however, it's become obvious, to me at least, that this really wasn't a fair assessment. The people making Sonic Forces did about the best they could do, it's just that what they could do was extremely limited. Sure, maybe this game was an indication that the franchise was in the gutter at the time, but it wasn't the game that put it in the gutter in the first place. If anything did that, it's whatever the series was going through 3 years earlier, but more recently, Sonic has kind of been on the road to recovery. There really isn't much reason nowadays for me to hold resentment over this game in particular, is there? This should mean that I can appreciate what the game does on its own terms without thinking about whatever horrible implications it has for the rest of the series, but no matter how hard I try, I still can't have fun playing it. When it isn't too shallow to be enjoyable, it's too clunky to be enjoyable, with effectively nothing in between. Maybe that wouldn't be the case if it weren't for this one control quirk that makes even the most modest amount of platforming an unpleasant experience, but as is, Sonic Forces is a game I have no desire to revisit. Okay, almost no desire to revisit. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, or at the very least got the basic idea of what I'm talking about here. I don't know, I'm worried I didn't convey it well since this is a bit different from what I usually make. Actually, at this point, I usually make nothing. On that note, subscribe if you want to see more, but be warned, I may not come back when you expect. Thanks for watching, and have a fantastic day!